Today, I want to tell you guys a story. Now, this is not a story that happened to me directly, or happened to me per se. But it's a story of someone I met once. Now, this past week, Fidel Castro died. Feel how you may feel about it. Celebrate, mourn, or like most people, don't really care because they don't understand history. This story is a cautionary tale. Now, I can't mention the name or the names of the people that are involved because if the media gets hold of this story, there's no doubt that they're going to want to interview the people. Now, the father has long since passed, but the son is still alive. When I was in my 20s, I met a man. We became friends. And his family was from Cuba. Now, over the next year or so, we became, pretty good friends, had coffee every single day. We had work together. We both quit the same job. Then we started to try to make a business together. It didn't work out because neither one of us had money. And turns out you can't really make a business without money. Though we had great ideas. And to this day, we're still friends. Now, his father, when he was growing up, now he was born, my friend, mind you, was born, I believe he was born in Cuba and immigrated to Puerto Rico at that time. His father, however, grew up with Fidel Castro. So he was, I believe, 8 or 9 years old when they met, and they spent many years together. They went to the university together. They fought together. And what he told me should be a cautionary tale for everybody about the dangers of socialism, the dangers of centralization of power. Now, like I said, I can't mention his name. Because I don't want to bring any unwanted attention. I have not asked for his permission to tell this story. And this is, in fact, the first time that I'm telling this story to anybody, actually. So he told me that when he knew Fidel Castro was always a hothead. In other words, he was always the type of person to jump in and just, if he found something that was unfair or he didn't like, he had no problems fighting, no problems going in. And we see this characteristic in different fascist leaders or socialist leaders. Hitler, Stalin. So we've seen this also in Che Guevara, which is a very fascinating story of another complete and total failure. But he was also, my father's friend, was also friends with Che Guevara. So it was a group of, I believe it was 12 people, but I'm not entirely certain of the number because I didn't meet all the people that were involved. This was a story that was told to me by Fidel Castro's friend. And as he was growing up, he saw that in the beginning, Fidel Castro, although he was a hothead, he was actually a pretty kind, decent person. But then when he went to the university, something happened. His friend didn't really know what had occurred. He suspects that it wasn't any one particular incident, but a series of incidents that occurred that changed his mind. And so the revolution occurred. Fidel Castro, this is not a history of Fidel Castro, but Fidel Castro ended up going into the mountains and doing guerrilla warfare. And he was very successful because the farmers, the peasantry, really needed somebody to speak for them. They needed a voice, and they didn't have that. Batista, which was the ruler of Cuba at that time, he was a bit of an ass, and he was a terrible person. He was also backed by America, big money. He was pretty much a puppet, and he was a ruthless puppet as well. So lo and behold, the revolution occurs, and Castro and his comrades win. And at first, Castro said that he was going to hold democratic elections, right? This was supposed to be the people's movement. Again, Nazi, the people's movement. Stalin, the people's movement. We see again and again that socialist movements that end in communism and tyranny and murder and death of hundreds of millions of people in the past century have always been the people's movement. We see, this is why I said you should not be scared of Donald Trump, you should be scared of Bernie Sanders. Yeah, he's a sweet old man, but it's not Sanders that I'm so much scared of as the person that comes after him once the structure is built. Let me explain. Sanders runs on the movement of the people, right? The disenfranchised. But really what he's saying is he's cherry picking this problem, that problem, that problem, that problem, and then he's finding whose fault is it? It was the 1%, it's the billionaires, which is completely false if you look at the data. But people don't look at the data, people don't study, they don't know anything. The fault actually lies in governmental policy, in domestic policy. But that is worrisome because Fidel Castro used the same strategy. And again, this is a strategy that goes back a long time, before Castro, before Sanders, before Hitler, before Stalin, right? Before we call it communism. It's a battle that has been waging on throughout history for quite a long time between globalism and nationalism. And when I mean globalism, I mean regional empires that would have loved to have been global, but were not able to at that time. The British Empire came close. The American Empire is the one that's come the closest, and you can see that we're nowhere near it. But it's a cautionary tale because Fidel Castro had promised that he would do democratic elections, and he had promised that he would work with the United States. So what happened, right? The United States did not like the fact that he overthrew Batista. And yet they were willing to work with him. But they demanded some things that he was not willing to give. Now, I'm not here to argue on behalf of the American government. I think both parties were wrong. What I'm here to say is what happened next. And what happened next is Fidel Castro became paranoid. Very similar to what Stalin and Hitler had. And again, you could almost do a template as to what happened. And my friend's father told me that at first he wasn't worried because Castro had never really been violent. I mean, yeah, throwing a rock here and there and not, fighting in a war to overthrow a dictator doesn't really count as violent if it's a revolution for the better of the people. Think of the American Revolution. It was violent in a sense, but in another sense, it brought about a lot of peace to the world because of its success. If you want to argue in the comments below. I have a lot of facts to prove that. But what happened was that Fidel became very paranoid of anybody that had been in the previous government. So one day he invited my friend's father. Again, they were best friends, right? So he invited my friend's father to a rally or a meeting of some sort in a stadium. Now, I don't know. I know the stadium was in Havana, and I know that there were stadiums in other parts. But the first time it took place was in Havana, in some sort of a stadium. I don't really know what kind of stadium it was. He just told me it was like a sports stadium. Probably soccer because that was the main game back then. At that time, Cuba didn't really play baseball. So what he did was he had all the people from the town show up. And he took the leaders, the old leaders, and he took a machete, right? And he proceeded to hacking their heads off. And he executed all of them. I don't know how many there were. He told me it was like a dozen or 2 dozen. And he did this in front of the people. Perhaps to show a sign of strength, but also to warn them not to side with the old. Now, at first, and this is very classic, and you can see this again in Nazi Germany. At first, nobody said anything because it wasn't us. It was, those were the people of the old regime. Of course, they had to pay for what they did. But then Fidel Castro became very paranoid, even more paranoid, and he started going after people around him, people who he thought were plotting against him. People who thought that maybe they could have done a better job, or maybe he thought that they were plotting or siding with the United States, which he saw as an enemy at that time, even though he was going on television saying that he wasn't, that he didn't think the United States was an enemy, when he clearly did, and he clearly had plans before. Now, my friend started to get a little worried because he started rounding up hundreds of people and having them stand up and shot in execution style. We're talking about thousands of people. And it became to the point where the people were scared to criticize, scared to say anything. And the idea that there would be democracy, that the people had a choice, that went out the window. He seized control, and he decided to institute, along with his friend Che Guevara, to institute a social or a communist government. It wasn't socialist, it was communist government, modeled after Soviet Russia. Now, at this time, he had a kind of a falling out with Che Guevara, and he pretty much kicked Che Guevara out. He wasn't going to kill him because, they were really good friends, but he certainly didn't want it. He wanted to stay. Che Guevara wanted to spread communism to the rest of South America and to create a communist union within South America to rival that of the United States. And Fidel Castro didn't want to do that. Fidel Castro wanted to master his own island and create a nation, of course, in his own image. But in order to create a nation, he had to first purge anything that would go against that. My friend's father Fidel Castro started to become suspicious of him. And he knew that it was only going to be a matter of time before he would be executed and his whole family. Because mind you, Fidel Castro wasn't just killing the people, he was killing their families as well. He was killing their children, their mothers, everybody from the entire family being wiped out. And this is something that's not reported. The left, when they speak of Fidel Castro, they praise him as this great leader. What they don't tell you is the tens of thousands of people he murdered. A lot of them women and children. Their only crime was they were related to the people that were in the previous government or people he feared. That was their crime. That was Fidel Castro. That's what he did. He wasn't a saint. And in my opinion, the world is better off without him. My friend's father took an airplane. At that time, planes were still going in and out of Havana. There wasn't this embargo that the United States made. The embargo came a little later on, and things got tough. Now, my friend's father left for, I believe, Miami first, and then he settled in Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico spoke Spanish and it was the closest culture to Cuba. And my friend then, he was very young and he grew up. Mind you, my friend I was 24, 23, something like that. My friend was in his 40s, 45. I've never cared very much for age. I've been friends with people that have been 60 and friends with teenagers, although few teenagers, so don't I was like 20, okay, so don't get the wrong idea there. But, I was good friends with him. We used to talk a lot about what happened, and his father would tell these stories, and it's a cautionary tale because the left wants to, and when I say the left, I mean the socialist and communist components of America that want to overthrow our way of life. All they want to do is centralize power so that they can control it. They don't give a damn about you. And I wanted to share this story because it's something that happened to someone I knew. They lived through it, right? This isn't in the history books. This isn't something that a movie that you saw. This is something that he lived through. He saw the execution of those people. He saw the execution of friends that Fidel Castro feared. So when we look at history and when we study what happened, we need to take a step back and understand the people. Did Fidel Castro do any good? Some. He did some good for the island. There's no doubt about that. The problem is that he did a lot of harm. And there were a lot of people that were hurt and disenfranchised because of him. So this is the Fidel Castro that history will remember. This is the Fidel Castro This is the reality of Fidel Castro. This is what he did. This isn't my opinion of, that I think communism is so terrible and socialism is horrible. They're beautiful on paper. On paper, they're beautiful. The problem is that when you implement them, the worst of humanity comes out. Capitalism and democracy are better only because they have checks and balances built in to prevent this. And even then, we still see Obama rising to power and Hillary Clinton almost rising to power. We see tyranny occurring. Andrew Jackson is a good example of someone, I've spoken about him before, where he was good for the country, but he was a dictator. Abraham Lincoln is another dictator, which we'll get to in another video. He's not the hero people make him out to be. And again, when I make that video, I'm going to show you his quotes in his own handwriting of what he thought about black people and what he really thought about the State of the Union and what the Civil War was actually about. That's nothing to do with this video, but it's an example of that we sometimes think differently of the figures in history. And the problem is that our history books are interpreted by our teachers that then instill these ideas. And right now we have a huge problem with our universities. Students are going in, they're learning all this crap that is not based in reality. They're demanding solutions that have been proven time and time again to fail. Not just fail, but fail with millions of deaths. Millions, hundreds of millions in the last century. Did you know that in the last century we killed more people in war than in all previous wars combined? Think about that for a moment. And at the root, at the very center of all those conflicts was socialism and communism. Yes, you could argue capitalism was there, but seeing as we won and the world is a significantly more peaceful place because of it, you can take your pick. I understand Iraq and Afghanistan were mistakes, but they were neoconservative socialist mistakes that were made by the extremes of both parties that America or Americans like myself are trying to overthrow. I don't defend the neocons, and I certainly will not defend the Democratic Party. But I just wanted to take this story and tell it so that you guys can think for yourselves and get a different perspective on who Fidel Castro was. And, Raul Castro is now in charge. He's no better. But he's also going to die very soon. And we'll see if Cuba is ready to be reformed. We'll see. You can put your comments below. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you disagree with me. And don't forget to go to www.dsunion.org. My name is Dr. Velez, and thank you for listening to this story.